Virtual field trips, how we can bring the outdoors indoors to our pupils during remote learning. This video I'm just going to take you through this experience that I had just this past week coming up to half term whenever I went out on my second virtual field trip with my students. Another live stream, jokes are us. This time I went into Knock River in Belfast, which is a fabulous little section of urban river which shows the combination of hard engineering and extremely channelized river sections, and where there is any kind of space at all, the mix of hard and soft. And indeed, at one point, there was also an area that has had river restoration applied to it. As we went around, because I was doing this as a live stream, I was able to interact synchronously with the students, which meant that I was able to ask them questions about what we were seeing. I was able to get them to apply their understanding from what we had done in theory, and really to reflect on what they were doing in the landscape. In some ways, actually, whenever I take large numbers of students out on field trips, they're so excited about being out on field trips that when I'm standing there giving them these fascinating lectures about what's happening at this site, I wonder really how much they are actually listening at the time. But through something like this, really was able to get them to listen and engage and get a real sense from everybody in the class through the chats function how they were seeing the landscape and really beginning to interpret it. One of the other benefits of it, and I don't want to underestimate this during lockdown, was just to be able to have a little bit of fun with the pupils. The days are long and they can be very monotonous, so I just happened at one point to walk past McDonald's. I offered them a virtual, emphasis on the virtual, teachers aren't paid that much, and breakfast for everybody in the class. And we just got the orders in, a little bit of fun with them like that as well. But the other thing that I did whenever we were out was to get them to fill in form here which collected some information on what I was telling them. So what were they gathering from what I was telling them about the location? So I took that and brought it into this map. Very, very simple. I just had to take the data that they had collected, put it into a CSV file and bring it in here, and then I can map it. And what I will be able to do after half term is to come and have a look at this with them and explore some of those areas that we've been to before. I'll just zoom out a little bit so you can see a bit of the context of where we are. This is a tributary that feeds off into Belfast Lough, Belfast, greater urban area. It's a relatively short river, and for most of its course, it's running down through the urban area. So it has been particularly heavily channelized in places. So survey site number 1, this is where we came in, and this is where I started off the live stream. And you can see here the flood wall and the flood wall, and this is the data that they collected here, the hard engineering strategy. I was able to explain to them why hard engineering was being used in this particular location. I also then took some photographs which I annotated up, and we were able to add those into the actual map itself. Secondly, I walked across here, and literally as I'm walking across, I'm videoing this. The river is culverted here through this point. This is C.S. Lewis Square, and it disappears from that section, coming out again at this side. And we go from a residential area there into a retail park. And again, if we zoom in, we can see the flood walls either side of that. This is a reasonably straight, pretty heavily channelized section of the river. Again, the hard engineering, the flood walls, the infrastructure being very close, and again I was able to actually screen grab that. This is actually a screen grab from the live stream that I was doing, so I was able to point these things out to the students and point out as I was actually standing there what the river was like. Then we took a little bit more of a walk down here, and as we come to the edge of the retail park, something quite significant happened. I've marked this on in green here. I'm just going to turn this layer off so that we can see a little bit better what's happening underneath. There's still a flood wall there, but you can see here that the banks are much more vegetated than they were before. There's a little bit of a pinch point. There's less vegetation there. Still a flood wall on this side because the infrastructure is very close. But as I'm walking down here, I can point this out to them. And we come to this side here, looking at the play park, looking at how far back the houses are there, and the space, the riverbank space that exists. On this bank, on the left bank, there is space, so there's no flood wall. In the right bank there is less space, so there is a flood wall. You can ask them a question in the actual feature itself. There is a play park. Does it matter if that play park is flooded? Is that going to damage it? Does it matter if those houses are flooded? So are we beginning to see why there is a flood wall there but not here? And we're able to let them see and explain why the flood walls are set back to allow the vegetation to grow. It's a mix here, and again the photograph can illustrate quite nicely as we go through that area the very different approaches taken. The flood wall is still there, there's a flood wall there, but where there is space, they're encouraging those floodplain plants to grow and to increase the habitat diversity. And all of that is done within that one little section of river where I can walk down. The final survey point that we went to was down here at what is called the Knock Park. This is somewhere where we have a lot more riverbank space. And this allowed us then to come in and have a really good look at the ultimate in soft engineering. This is a river restoration project. The river used to flow in a reasonably straight line here. It was very heavily channelized. It came down here fast, and then it came to this little pinch point, the bridge here, which caused a lot of backing up, a lot of flooding. The houses here were quite regularly flooded. So you can see down here again, we have some of our flood walls in place because the property is very, very close to the river. But down here, where there is space, we have this river restoration. Meanders reintroduced. In fact, as I was standing here, it was very hard to see the river at times because the vegetation had grown and the floodplain had been restored very well. Habitat restoration improves habitat diversity. And here we can see some of the evidence of the levee that it does exist here close to the houses is set well back using the natural store, the river restoration that went on. And I was able to get them to speculate about this. We saw these pillars, posts that are at the side of the river. I was asking them why they had been put there. They had obviously just recently been put there because the week before we'd had some quite considerable flooding in Northern Ireland. And Lucy was able to guess that they were there to measure the depth of the floods that were happening. Again, able to ask those questions in the moment as I was actually standing there with them and bringing this to life. So that is a little bit of an insight how actually in these times of significant challenge of remote learning, that perhaps sometimes if we're able to think a little bit outside the box, there are ways that we can approach this that actually allow us to do things perhaps better than would be the case in the classroom. I absolutely can't wait to take my students out into the field and let them see it and experience it for themselves. And this is, again, never going to replace that. But I would love to think that when we return to a greater degree of normality, that I can find some way of live streamed field trips once more. Watch this space.